Hello and welcome to Stephen University. This week we are discussing I Am My Monster, an episode in which, it says it on the tin, doesn't it, really? Once this title got confirmed, it was inevitable, really.
Yeah, everyone that didn't want Stephen to be that big monster was like, oh, shit.
Yeah, and then the artwork that they released in the build-up to this showed everyone sort of trucking across the water, except for Stephen. It was like, yeah. There's really no way around it. You can live in denial. You can sort of suggest that maybe he'll somehow separate from his gem, and the gem will become the monster, so Stephen can, be present in the episode. But sadly, not to be. But with that said, what we got, something pretty awesome. Do you want me to quickly run a recap, Chris?
Yeah, man. Recap this bad boy.
So this episode opens with the people of Beach City all being disturbed by the ground shaking. What is this? Is it an earthquake, we think? They're all looking up at towards the lighthouse. Because I think naturally, if you lived in Beach City, if anything weird happened, you'd look towards where the gems live, wouldn't you? I mean, that'd be the first place I'd check.
Yeah. Well, especially in this world where nothing's really happened since Spinel.
Oh yeah, that's a fair point as well. Like, it's been a while, hasn't it, since any weird gem shit's happened for these people. Well, sorry guys, you're in danger again, I guess, because there's a giant monster at the lighthouse. It's Stephen. He's transformed off screen. I think we'll talk about whether that's a good or a bad decision at a later time. He is now the pink kaiju-y type Godzilla monster, which was nicknamed Wormy Boy because we couldn't see its legs, and now has to be renamed. I don't know what we're going to call it. He's a giant pink kaiju. The gems all gather immediately. The crystal temps are straight in there as well, knowing that something is wrong and that they need help. They quickly determine that to get Stephen away from from people in Beach City, they get him out into the water where Lapis holds him. The diamonds inconveniently show up at the worst possible time, as always. Well, worst or best, I suppose, in this case. But as they point out when they arrive, why is this sort of stuff always happening when we come to visit? Everyone starts feeling really sorry for themselves and sort of blaming themselves for Stephen's predicament. Connie rallies the troops, tells them to stop feeling sorry for themselves because the only person that doesn't have Stephen to help him through the tough times is Stephen, and that he needs them now to be there for him the way he was there for them. And they all go to give Stephen a big old hug. They remind him of the various ways in which he's helped them. Keep in mind, very important, we keep in mind that the transformation occurred at the moment he realized or felt like he was a fraud, because he didn't feel like he was helping anyone. He was just making things worse. So everyone reminding him how and which ways he helped them, and believed in them. I think is a powerful moment. And Stephen, the Stephen Pink Kaiju monster, starts to cry. He then transforms back and continues to cry in front of the gems. Again, I think an important moment, because I feel like the gems and the gang, I feel like Stephen was often in this series sort of hiding his situation from everyone, and I think him openly crying in front of them is finally him acknowledging that something is wrong.
You got, I think a key moment is the final person to jump on him is
Connie, of course,
and hug him is Connie, who also gives the monster a kiss as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry, yeah, you're right. Connie is and she says one of the more profound things as well. So we'll come back to that when we get to it. But I mean, a pretty straightforward episode in terms of plot, but it certainly seems to have sparked a lot of discussion. We talked last week. We hinted that we would discuss some of the criticisms that this episode has come up against in terms of like some fan stuff. Now, at the time, I was only really going off one or two comments I'd seen in the Discord, but I've since gone to the subreddit for Steven Universe, clicked on the discussion for these episodes, scrolled past a bunch of just people loving it, couldn't find anything. I was like, that's weird. So then I, because I know that fandoms are predictable beasts, I switched it to the most downvoted comments. And look, you can disagree with people you like, but just a little side note here on Reddit: the downvote button is not a disagree button. Don't just express it when you don't like.
Did you have were there people making really eloquent like cases that were getting unfairly downvoted?
It was a mix. The very bottom of the barrel was the bottom of the barrel for a reason. It was people not really explaining points very well, just being like, the show's ruined, like, this is a slap in the face without any real context or explanation. But there were definitely comments mixed in with that, making really certainly valid. I don't agree with them, but they're valid arguments, and I understand where they're coming from, even if I don't agree. So there were definitely people being completely fair and eloquent, being downvoted into oblivion. The very bottom, admittedly, was a bunch of people just being absolute arses. But hey, what can you do? Like, there were so many of them I read them, because I went through a bunch and I wrote down a couple of like people's criticisms. So I tried to generalize, like, and put together like an overall view of what the negative side of the reaction to this has been. Just so I can give some. We'll come to it towards the end. I'll read through a sort of a little list I put together of some of the common themes coming up in criticism of this episode. But yeah, there were definitely some people that were just, spitting their dummy out and throwing their toys out the pram. And those people deserve to be downvoted. They were being disrespectful and like, yeah.
So what was the? Well, before we get to that, what did you think?
I loved it. I mean, this is an incredible episode. I mean. It has to go hand in hand with the one before it. It doesn't stand on its own, but it probably shouldn't. I mean, if you just watch this episode, you'd be like, that's a weird solution. But basically, if you miss out the piece that was Everything is Fine. Because Everything is Fine lays out the thesis here. Because for me, you look at this season of trauma, I'm going, well, we're not going to resolve all of his trauma. There's no solution to that trauma that isn't him taking it upon himself to see a therapist and, get his life together in some sort of way. And we said that all along. He kept looking for quick solutions to his problems, but really he needed to do this. So the fraud complex thing, pushing him over the edge, really does make this episode work. And I think if you take that out, then I think a lot of the complaints are more valid. Does that make sense? Well, when we come back to them later, we'll see. But I mean, just from there's two levels an episode like this can work on, right? When you're at the end of a series, there's the actual, does this satisfyingly wrap up the plot that has been established for Steven Universe? No. Does this satisfyingly wrap up the plot for Steven Universe Future? I think so. The other element is, do the emotional character beats function in this? Did you feel the emotion of this episode, the weight of this episode? I did, but I know a lot of people didn't. So for me, it worked on 2 out of 3 fronts, and let's be honest, the third front, being a satisfying conclusion to Steven Universe's story, is an unreasonable expectation at this point, in my opinion.
As we discussed last episode, it's you have to kind of judge it as Steven Universe Future. I loved it. So I 100% loved it. I was going to say, where are you at with it? I loved it. I think it's the most emotionally I've ever most emotional I've ever been watching Steven Universe. I welled up, man, when they're running and all start hugging and all start telling him what he means to them. I welled up, like some tears formed in my eye. I'm not ashamed to say it. I thought it was a phenomenal piece of television. I really, really loved it. I have any kind of complaints about it from I think we referenced last time, and obviously you've hinted a big part of the discussion being, does it work as a resolution? I have those challenges with the show, but they, for me, come more in the next episode. Mm-hmm. I think this episode did what this episode needed to do. This episode wasn't about him resolving his problems. This episode was about him reaching breaking point and being put in a position where he had to be honest with the people that he loved, and all of them together. Because as the last episode, as you say, it really goes hand in hand with the last episode, as Everything Fine demonstrated, and we talked about it a lot on our Everything's Fine review. The purpose of Everything's Fine was to say not everyone realizes what's going on, because whilst he's had moments of where it's been apparent how what he's dealing with, they've been smaller moments, not small moments, but smaller moments than the collective with individual people. This episode was about a climax of him turning into the monster because he thinks he's a fraud because of everything that's happened. And then them kind of getting through to him and saying, no, we all need to work together. We all need to take this seriously. We need you to talk. We need you to open up. And this episode ends with that. I think what's key for me is the episode the hug, it's not like they hug him, he unforms, and then he's fine. And he's like, cheers, guys, you're my family. Like, he's still broken. He's just talking about it. The first stage to a lot of things is admitting that there's a problem. This is him admitting there's a problem. This is him, the fact that he, the lion laugh is sort of a breaking the tension thing. It's not, it's heartbreaking. He's in floods of tears with everyone around him, and he's not afraid to cry. He's not afraid to show his support network just how he's feeling. It's not a hug, in my opinion. It's not a hug resolves everything. I think it was the job of the next episode to show how he went forward and what happened beyond that. And I have, like I've said all along, I have my challenges with that. I don't think a throwaway line indicating that he's got a therapist and is going to keep talking to that therapist is enough for me personally. And we'll probably talk about that maybe in this episode because it's so interlinked to criticism of this episode. But probably more. I was
going to say we'll save it in the next one. I've got a really interesting quote from Rebecca Sugar about the therapy thing and how it was handled. But we'll come back to that on the next episode because I think that could spawn a whole discussion itself about a meta commentary on the show. It's really clever. She's done something. She's playing 4D chess, and we're playing 3D chess. We're like she's 2 layers ahead of us at all times. Like when I get to it next episode, a little tease for you guys. There's something she said in an interview with Vulture that fucking blew my mind. I'm not even kidding you. Like actually broke my frame. Like I just couldn't wrap my head around it. So we'll come back to that. But yeah, carry on.
But I certainly, so regardless of where that discussion takes us, and yeah, there might be, and absolutely, and we'll talk about it next episode because I have some feelings on it. But I don't think it was. I think this episode did exactly the job it was meant to, beautifully. Like, because even I think you should only judge it on Steven Universe Future. But if you want to look at Steven Universe as a whole entity, the whole franchise, as it were, I guess, the whole thing's been about love and being about talking to each other and being about supporting each other and being there for each other. And the climax is all the characters running and not fighting, not beating the monster, but showing Stephen affection and talking to him about how they feel about him. I honestly, for me, I thought it was beautiful.
So 2 things. First of all, I want to take a moment here to just for me and every listener to appreciate the joy of Chris. Like if I could put if I could put a little montage in here, if I had the time, I don't sadly, but if I had the time right now, a little montage of you being snippy and grumpy, like that moment of you in an early episode saying the bloody cookie cat got more backstory than this boy. Or, why does he need a weapon? The gun laws are loose in the US. Or any of the other things you said in the early episodes, and just like the transformation, it's just incredible. Like I love so much how much this show has won you over, and I think to get you to a point where you're like, I watched the final episode, I welled up, not afraid to admit
penultimate.
Sorry, well yeah, in this case we're talking about the penultimate, but yeah, I watched the final episodes, I welled up. Like that's a remarkable thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I just want to take this moment to stand by your journey in all this because it's been an absolute pleasure to be part of it. And from what I understand from our listeners, it's been a pleasure to witness it too. A lot of people have said that's what they've gotten most out of this show. And admittedly, that is very much the first section of episodes, building up to Ocean Gem, Mirror Gem, and then up to Jailbreak.
Yeah, I wasn't. Yeah, I wasn't. Those two particular examples, just for anyone not remembering the episode order, were like episodes 1 and 2 or something. So yeah.
Of course.
I've only seen 20 minutes.
That is my point. Is like I'm going your very first reaction to the show.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
here we are in the final couple of episodes, and your reaction to those. It's just been amazing to see. And you know, I got to imagine for me, it was a personal thing of just, you know, I would love to get my friend into this show. I think he would like it. I like it, and I like to share this thing I enjoy with a friend. You know. It would mean a lot to me, so I got that out of it. I was always going to enjoy seeing you come around to the show. But I think it's been really cool for people who like the show to physically watch someone come around to it who was a tricky customer to convince. I mean, you didn't even watch all of Avatar: The Last Airbender, you know, which is, you know, categorically renowned as one of the best animated shows. So like, you were a tough customer to crack for sure, and I think it's been satisfying, and also for our listeners, a bit, not redeeming is the right word, but like validating, because you love this show and you go, I know this is a good show. Why is hardly anyone watching it? Like, no one in my own life is watching it. A lot of Steven Universe fans feel weirdly isolated in their love for this show because they don't know too many people in the real world who also love it. That's a theme I come across regularly. You know, people who love this show having to turn to the internet to talk about it because no one they know watches it. Having that be your situation, and then hearing someone fall in love with it, you go, no, I'm right. I am right. I'm not a crazy person. At home, I feel like a crazy person. No one watches the show. No one appreciates it in my real life. But here's this person who's like one of those people falling in love with it. Admittedly, forced to do it through a podcast. But yeah, I just wanted to take this moment to acknowledge what an awesome journey that's been, and how much I appreciate you giving it the time and patience. Again, forced, but it means a lot to me, so. And it's evidently meant a lot to our listeners. So
I wouldn't, you know, was it worth the time it's taken? Yeah. No, I'm joking. I am joking very much.
So that's number one. And now, in response to your actual points that you just made, I 100% agree with you. I think what's really interesting about this is I do think, as you've pointed out, there are criticisms that can be levied at how this show has ended, but I think you're right. They're actually more aimed at the next episode, because for me, this episode is a as you said, perfectly setting him on that path. You know, set out from the previous episode. Like there's a real 1-2 sort of thing happening here.
Well, we've literally seen him in the last few episodes run away. It's the boy who's been running away and insisting he's fine, still crying and admitting he's not. It's for me absolutely a resolution to that. It's not a resolution to his problems, but I don't think this episode is meant to be a resolution to his problems. This episode is meant to make the boy who's been running away not run. It's meant to make the boy who's insisting everything's fine admit it's not fine, and that's what it does.
Yeah, because to me, like the reason he finally caved and became the monster was this fraud complex thing we talked about in the last episode. You know, he felt everyone expected him to be this perfect being that was able to help everyone, and he's a person, so he's not that. Of course, he's not. Like, no one is that. Like, you know, so being put on that pedestal by your circumstances, by how much everyone around you loves you, can be damaging in a weird way. You know, it can create a feeling of fraud complex. It can create a feeling of worthlessness, because if you don't feel like you're living up to that expectation, then you feel like you're losing. Do you know what I mean? If the expectation in a game of football was for you to beat the other team by 11 points and anything less wasn't good enough, you'd never win and you'd feel awful all the time.
Yeah.
Right? So, you know, he's starting at a deficit. So he was feeling like he always made things first. Made things worse. So they didn't cure him with that hook. And what they did was they explained to him all of the ways he's helped them, reminding him that he's not a fraud, reminding him he's not worthless at all. The things Connie and Pearl say stuck out the most as important to me. They both talked about him hiding how bad things were and how scary it is to like hide a part of yourself. And when you look back through Future, going right back to the very first episode, he's always sort of brushed off and disguised and hidden what he's going through. Going back to Prickly Pear, how dismissive was the ending of Prickly Pear? It didn't seem it at the time, but now I look back, I realise how clever that was. That ending felt slightly off to me the first time, because I was just like, I think I've said enough. Like, come on, you've got some stuff to talk about here. And the reason that didn't sit right with me is because it wasn't... Stephen isn't being himself here anymore. He is, as you put it, broken. He's not immediately turning to the gems and telling them how he's feeling. If anything, he was dismissive. So then for us to spend the next couple episodes going, it's a bit weird that the gems are just sort of ignoring him when he's clearly so damaged. No, he cued that. That was on him. We didn't see it. We missed it. Like, we as reviewers, we missed it, I think, if I'm being honest. And feel free to disagree if you don't. I don't want to speak for you, Chris, but I feel like we failed there, because we should have seen that for how nuanced it was, which is that Stephen dismissed it with a joke. Like, I think I've said enough. This is fine. Like, don't worry about it. I'm like, clearly this went wrong, but like, whereas old Stephen, prior to this sort of all starting to swirl and cascade and spiral out of control for him, would have immediately turned to the gems, told them everything. The fact he was even keeping things and feelings from the gems that led to the cactus monster is out of character for Stephen. So, he was doing an awful lot of work throughout the show from episode 1 onwards to hide it. So, for me, both... Go on, sorry.
From the gems' point of view as well, he's a man now. They wouldn't know when... Do you know what I mean? There's a certain element of, we need to let him fail and go through stuff. It must be so awkward and difficult for them to know the line on how they interact with him.
Exactly. So the significance to me of the monster kaiju Stephen crying in front of everyone cannot be understated. It can't. You can't. I can't express how important that is, because that is someone who has not been properly expressing how he feels to anyone for 20 episodes. Well, 19 at this point. So having him break down, even in the monster form, is a real sign of the progress he's just suddenly made. And we'll come to it later, but there's a lot of people who talk about agency in this episode. And while I agree it's a shame we don't get more interaction from Stephen because he has no agency because he's this monster, in terms of the resolution, it doesn't affect the resolution for me. Because then he turns back into Stephen, where he has yet another chance to turn around and run away, or deny, or pretend.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone's there, they're all looking at him, and he just breaks down. The episode ends on that note, and I think that is extremely important. Not hiding it, not running away, willing to break down in front of these people, just crying his eyes out. That is super, super vital. And I feel like you could watch this episode and go, they fight the monster a little bit, but then they give it a hug and then he's fine. But I think anyone saying that is missing the nuance of what's happening here. And I don't mean to sound dismissive of the point of view, but I just don't agree with this idea that they resolve it with a hug. It just doesn't make sense. It's just not what's on screen.
No, same. Because of that last moment where he's still, whereas, as I said earlier and as you said just then, he doesn't run away. He stays there. He stays crying. He's himself again. Absolutely. I loved as well, because I'm intrigued to get to the kind of the criticisms and the moments and stuff. But I love as well how beautifully they've played, and I can see people not liking this either, but how beautifully they've played Connie and Stephen, because this episode and the next episode, we got a kiss in this episode and we got a direct kiss in the next episode as well. But more than that, it's what is that called? Challenges or something? Or?
No, you said it was you just referred to it as a direct kiss, which is ironic because one of Stephen and Connie's most iconic early episodes was called An Indirect Kiss.
Oh yeah, nice.
So yeah, I just because I knew there's no way you remembered that, so I was chuckling because in my head I just heard all of the listeners going, "Chris is truly one of us. Look at him referencing old episodes, but I knew better."
Yeah, no, I didn't. Yeah, that wasn't deliberate at all.
I was just sat there going, "You're all going to be so disappointed to know that that's not purposeful."
Yeah, no, that wasn't deliberate.
Sorry, guys, to shatter the illusion.
but it's what I love is she rallies the troops. She makes them see sense.
Yes.
She is the final person to speak to him and kisses him as this monster. And it's just so sweet, and it's just so clear that like they're each other's future, and that she can see. She's kind of got the best of both worlds in terms of she's got the humanity and the understanding of the human aspects that comes from Greg, but she's also fought with the crystal gems and been way more of a crystal gem than Greg has been. So she's the only person that truly can reflect and identify with both sides of him and both sides of his personality. And I love that they made it her that would ultimately, she's the reason he ends up human again. That comes from her speech. That comes from her idea. She pulls them together in the way that Stephen would have. Like, it's just, I think the Stephen and Connie, I think they did everything right. I really do.
Yeah. Would you like to hear what I wrote down? What I took the time to go through this episode, pause it, and write down everything that each person said to him when they gave him the hug. Do you want to hear what everyone said?
Yeah.
So Garnet says, "When I fell apart, you were there for me. I'll be there for you now. I'm here." So a lot of people think the "I'm here" is a reference to the "I'm here's" from Here Comes the Thought, Garnet's song for Stephen and Connie when they were having the mindful education. And that whole "When I fell apart, you were there for me" could reference a couple of different times. When they first fell apart in Jailbreak, when they were separated by Jasper, he was there and helped them reunite. He was also there for them when they separated and argued in the arc building up to the wedding.
Yeah, I viewed it as being the wedding arc personally.
Because
that seemed like the most monumental.
Sure, I mean, honestly, like neither would surprise me, or both. That will make sense too. It could literally be a reference to both at the same time. I don't know. When I've fallen apart in the past, you've always been there for me. I don't know. However you want to look at it, but I thought that was interesting. Greg's is probably one of the more generic, which is a shame. But he says, "I'm here, Stu Ball. Whatever you need, I'll make it happen." Yeah,
I think they kind of had their moments and discussions in Mr. Universe.
Yes, but it was a lot of Greg just being like, "It'll be fine. We'll work on it. We'll make it better. I'll give you ice cream." I just wish Greg gets a moment we'll talk about later in this episode where he gets to be awesome. We'll come back to it. But in that moment, I wish they'd thought of something a little bit less generic for Greg to say. Everyone else gets really cool stuff to say, specific and unique to them. Greg's just a more generic, "I'm there for you," which is fine.
But I think that's I'll argue against that. For the voice, I'll be the voice of the people arguing in the audience. I feel that for him, it's not generic. It sounds generic because it's what a dad would say to a son, but that's the point of Greg. That's the point of his character.
Yeah, we'll move the earth for Stephen. Whatever you need, I'll make it happen. Yeah.
Yeah, he's being Greg. He's being an awesome dad, and he's going, and I think the more nuanced stuff of, "Oh, how great is it that you feel you can argue with me?" and that kind of thing was said in Mr. Universe.
True.
But this is him. I think it's like it may not be nuanced, but since how often has Greg as a character been nuanced?
You've got me there.
I think it's exactly in keeping with the character.
Paradox is, "Stephen, you never gave up on me for some reason I don't understand. I'll do the same for you." That was one of my favourites. Because it's kind of funny. For some reason I don't understand, I'll do the same for you. The idea that like Stephen constantly believed that she was going to be better and be, and be free, and of the, sort of like that her gem sort of upbringing or whatever, Era 2 upbringing. He continued to believe that she would see the good in things eventually, and she did. And the idea that she's like, "Well, I'm just going to do that for you. It doesn't matter what you turn into and what you do. I'm going to continue to be there." It's a beautiful one. Paradox is one of my favourites. Amethysts was good. I know you feel bad. Believe me, I get it. Sometimes it feels like you're never going to like yourself, but it's possible, man. Again, reminding Stephen, like Peridot did, of how he helped her. A handful of Amethyst episodes were about Amethyst struggling to fit in and know who she was, and he helped her through that. So yeah, I think that's a good one. This one is more related to how Pearl has realized that Steven's been keeping this sort of on the down low as he could in the last sort of few weeks, months, whatever the timescale of the series is. Steven, I know how awful it feels to keep a part of yourself secret. You shouldn't hide anything from me. And obviously that's a direct reference to the fact that she kept the pink diamond secret for so long, and how awful that must have been for her. But again, it's her acknowledging like Steven's. It's her speaking to Steven and relating to Steven, but for the audience as well, it's a really clever reminder of the fact that the reason this hasn't happened before is because they didn't really know, that because he was hiding it. I think it's important to reiterate that in this moment. So it's not just part of the previous episode, it's also referenced in this one. So just a bit like sort of just layering it in. And then, of course, Connie's is the final one. Steven, you must have been so afraid to show us this side of yourself, but we're not going anywhere. We're all going to take care of you the same way you take care of us. And I just, again, reminding him that Connie's is both. Connie's is wonderful because it combines what everyone has been saying. It combines that, I know you're afraid to show us this side of yourself, but we're supporting you regardless. And we're going to take care of you the same way you've taken care of us. Again, reminding him that he's not a fraud, that they've all benefited from knowing him. He isn't worthless. And that's, of course, the moment he starts crying and then reforms. I think when you add all that up, it really does. It's really well done.
And the dialogue's beautiful. It's amazing. I think they're all in character. It's a shame we didn't get a Lapis line.
She does have a line, but it's a more like, I think hers is like I'll get him or something like that. She's one of the first ones to she's sort of like cause
the Lapis of it all. We'll come back to Lapis because but what was I going to say about that? Oh yeah, the question on because I interpreted it personally as their words got through to him, he got emotional, and that made him go back to Steven. I've seen some reaction videos and some kind of comments where it's been more interpreted. It's been interpreted more practically, which is that because he was crying and his tears can heal, the tears go all over him, the tears go in the water, and then his healing powers make him turn back to Steven. What was your interpretation?
I didn't see it that way because to me the tears were so. The tears were clearly. What's the one? The tears were there for me to show us that moment of him breaking down in front of everyone. If you look at it practically, diamond powers weren't working because yellow, blue, and white all tried to use their new powers on him to turn him back. None of them worked. Diamond powers weren't going to work here.
They do. I think one of the arguments is because doesn't the water turn pink when the tears hit the water?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. But he's got pink tears because he's a big giant pink monster. And if you put a thing that's coloured pink into water, the water will turn a bit pink. That doesn't mean it's necessarily doing that. I mean, it could. This is the other thing that's throwing me a little bit, is a lot of people keep referring to this as corruption, and it doesn't help that corruption is referenced in the episode. But I don't think this is corruption. I would love to see if we can get someone to ask Rebecca this question at some point. Is it a form of corruption? I don't think it is. I think this is shapeshifting. I think this is exactly... So... Rebecca talked to me recently about this perfect Steven concept, and it's a really old concept apparently they've had since like 2015 or 16 that they were looking at doing an episode where Steven becomes perfect Steven in quote marks. He's taller, he's like more in shape, he's handsome, he's got the quiffy hair, and he thinks he's going to be able to solve everyone's problems, right? That's what we got in Everything's Fine, right? Was in quote marks perfect Steven, what he thinks everyone sees in him, which is super clever, and we've already praised that enough previous episode. But that's shape-shifting, isn't it? That's him becoming what he's projecting, right? So in this, the reverse is happening now. He's seeing himself as a monster, so he's become the monster. To me, it's simple shape-shifting. It's the opposite of what happened last week. Last week, he was in so much denial, he turned into perfect Steven, in quote marks. This week, he was so... I say this week, like these episodes of a week behind him. This episode, he was so down on himself and so seeing himself as this horrendous monster that was hurting everyone that he physically turned into it. I don't see it as corruption at all, personally. But it doesn't help that when they first get there, the three diamonds, one of them, I think Yellow, says, "Is he corrupted?" Asks that question, raising the question. And then Garnet's response is, "That doesn't matter right now," which is a really weird line of dialogue. Like, I get it. Like, why put either of those lines in? If you're going to have someone raise the question and have someone dismiss it, don't put it in. But I think they very much set up that none of the diamond powers are working on him. You know, White couldn't get through to him with her new power. Blue's power to make him feel better didn't make him feel better. Yellow couldn't shapeshift him. So Steven's healing tears ain't going to do shit. I think we very well established that the diamond powers weren't doing anything. And also, personally, this was such a cathartic moment to see Steven finally openly weep in front of everyone, considering he's hid it for so long.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
The idea that the tears healed him, that takes away from that for me. Like, no, please, can we not have that? I
was just curious what you thought of it.
I didn't perceive it that way. I could see how you might, though, because you're right. You can physically see the pink mixing with the water, and we've had a historical sort of context in the show. We've seen that the diamond juices can have various magical healing properties. It's definitely been established in the show, and I guess maybe that was part of it. I don't know, a little muddled maybe, but to me, it's the Harry Potter film ending where Neville kills Nagini, and that looks like that's what shatters Voldemort instead of Harry's spell. That drove me mad in the movie. The way the movie edits it, Neville slices Nagini and Voldemort disintegrates because they happen simultaneously. In the book, Neville slices Nagini much earlier on, which means that when Harry finally takes on Voldemort, it's Harry that ends Voldemort. Whereas in the movie, it's a little less clear.
Well, it's not even, I can't really remember it, but even the notion of does Harry do the whole catching of the other wand and all of that stuff in the film?
No, I don't think so. No, they don't.
And it's such a because that idea of, like, technically, because I remember, like, reading the last book going, how are they going to, if Harry has to kill him, how are they've managed to avoid Harry being a killer for this entire book series. Mm-hmm. How are they going to make the hero the killer? And they arguably don't. Voldemort shoots a spell, and Voldemort's own wand then goes on him. Because
Harry uses Expelliarmus, which knocks your wand out of your hand, and the wand very easily comes out of Voldemort's hand because it's actually Harry's, right? And it rotates.
It's actually Harry's wand. Yeah,
it spins off into the air.
No, it's not Harry's wand. It's the big fancy
it's the elder
wand.
Yeah, it's the elder one.
Yeah,
but it belongs to
Harry's because Harry won it. Harry won it
precisely.
when he disarmed Draco or whoever it was.
Yeah, when he disarmed Draco, he won the wand's allegiance.
He's the true owner.
So it flips out of Voldemort's hands, and as it spins in the air, the Avada Kedavra spell he just launched from his thing turns on himself. Yeah, he kills himself. It's kind of it's the Spider-Man 1 ending, isn't it? Goblin flies the glider at Spider-Man, he dodges it, and it hits himself. Like, it's the Harry Potter equivalent. It's very clever. It's very well written in the book as well. Anyway, they don't do that in the film, and in the film it's really confusing as to whether Neville or Harry is actually the cause.
Exactly. Yeah, the film didn't point.
So I think maybe that's the same thing here, where it wasn't the intent, but if you edit the shots together in a certain way, it can certainly look like that. And look, if somebody wants a magical explanation to this, I don't begrudge you having that, I guess. If you want to sort of point, for me that doesn't work as well, and because it's ambiguous, I'm going to choose that it's the thing we've been praising for this podcast thus far.
Yeah, same.
But yeah, that's certainly an interesting thought, though.
Going back to the Lapis of it all, I love that, like, this consistent thing of Lapis is fucking powerful. Like, the only gem that gets anywhere near beating or holding off the Steven monster is Lapis, like, who uses her water powers to trap him for a fair amount of time. Yes, as you said, we see Nephrite not speaking, but we see Nephrite not able to. Is it Nephrite? Is that the right? Alexandrite, sorry. We see Alexandrite, who doesn't speak, fight him. We see the others, but it's Lapis that holds him down for the longest. And just, I love this, like, recurring idea of like Lapis is fucking strong.
Yeah, 100%. And it's because I mean, if you're a gem and your like role in society is to shape planets, terraforming, you're probably going to be quite powerful, and they've kept that quite consistent, I would say. The water powers are pretty badass. I mean, they should be useless on a dry desert planet, but I mean,
Yeah.
boy oh boy, you put her on a planet with as much water as Earth has, she's a monster. she's an absolute beast. 100%. Yeah, and it's funny though because people have said for years and years, it's so funny you should point that out because people always go on about how like overpowered Lapis is. She's crazy powerful. It's insane. Like, yeah, that's always been the case. And then a load of people in the comments when I went through the thread on Reddit for this, so many people being surprised by Lapis' power, and I was like,
God.
come on, guys. Like, this is well established that she's OP as shit. Like, come on. She's OP AF is what she is.
Yeah. That's the point.
Yeah. So, yeah, but it's cool, though. It is really neat to see. And it's just nice to have that reaffirmed in this last episode. And even she can't hold him for too much longer. It really takes all of them combined to do it. So, yeah, absolutely. Let's take a look then at some of the criticisms, I guess. I'm just going to run through some of them, and we'll talk about them in general because I'm not going to go through each one of them. But some of them I just wrote down keywords I was seeing a lot. Some of them I wrote down specific points, so we'll start with those. Some people saying they sort of this is a more specific one, but a lot of people saying they don't feel like it really said anything, like about trauma and like. I guess they didn't specify, but they were like it just didn't really have a message to it, which maybe they felt like it should have. I guess that's a fair criticism. I don't really feel like it needed to say something.
No. Personally, for me, the message was about opening up and talking and letting people in and letting people see your pain.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. There you go. So yeah. There it is. A lot of people disappointed. It was they felt it was like, but we were building to some sort of huge climax, so the scale of it was problematic for them. And that's more, I think, aimed at all 4 episodes than just this specific one. But I don't think it was building up to a big. I think time and time again they kept making the story small and just about Steven. And I think that's what this was. I think I said. Yeah, I think you know. The criticism of this not being a big epic conclusion doesn't really work for me because it was never going to be. This has always been about, like I said, I think I said this in the last episode, but you know, the Steven Universe series is about saving the universe from the Gems and Era 2 and all that crazy stuff, and it's saving hundreds of thousands of lives. This is saving one person from themselves, you know, from emotional distress. Like this is it's so yeah, a lot of talk about expectations and wasted potential. So a lot of people complaining about the dangling plot threads relating to his individual traumas, because obviously as the series went on, we built up a list of things that are traumatizing this boy. Not just all the physical threats to his life from his youth, but a lot of issues related to his mom, to his dad, to his, to his upbringing, like, you know, all this other stuff that's built up over time. But again, for me, as a response to that, I would say that it doesn't seem like the goal was ever really to specifically handle the actual individual traumas, but to handle the thing that was causing everything to build up, which was him not communicating with everyone else, which is what this was. I don't know if you want to add anything
I
to
think
that.
There's an element, and it could be that, you know, this, a lot of this, because these would have been written when people would have seen all 3. So, you know, who's to say they're talking about this episode specifically? Even if the threads about this episode, they could still be taking into account others. I think that wasn't the purpose of this episode, as we've already said. I kind of get that a little bit with the next episode, but the notion for me, I think, is that all of that stuff in the time in between would have been talked about. I'm not really sure. You know, if people are worried about scale, Stephen chatting to a therapist about his mum isn't going to be what people would have wanted to see anyway.
And that is the answer it should have been, right?
And that is that is based on this episode. That is the answer it would be. But I do think that there is more the next episode could have done to show us that. Yes.
Yeah, so a lot of people, yeah, that comes up a lot. Like looking through my notes, like it would have been preferable to spend more time tackling the trauma beyond just acknowledging that he has it, because this felt unsatisfying. We just covered that. Some people talking about this one I thought was really interesting because I don't. It makes a lot of sense, but like I also just don't think this is what was in the episode. But I could be misremembering. But like people talking about, so Steven doesn't have any agency in this episode in terms of like he's a mindless monster, right? I understand that in the final confrontation. But a lot of people talking about, oh, I have trauma, and I think it's upsetting to suggest that. And there was some of this in the Discord, and then there was a fair bit of this I noticed as well in the Reddit. So just so the people in the Discord know, I'm not just specifically talking about them in this case. A few people who've experienced, either trauma or some sort of emotional upheaval that's led to them having to go to therapy or whatever, saying that the key here is that Steven should have chosen. He needed to have the agency to choose to get better. It can't just be that his friends showed up and then he suddenly was. And I guess in this episode, he's a mindless monster, and then they comfort him, and then he sort of calms down. But I would say that the thing they do in the next episode, setting up the therapy, is Steven choosing.
Yeah, I think
so.
This
you're not
episode,
robbed of that here.
I think you're robbed of that a little bit in the next, but then again, we don't. I get it because we don't. I can see why people are saying that because we don't see it. I think the assumption is that it happens off screen because Steven doesn't make any choices here. It doesn't. It ends with him breaking down.
So do you think,
in a way, more than even when he was the monster? Because it's himself showing that side of it. He's listening to Pearl. He's not hiding that side of himself.
Do you think this is a bit? Do you think this is kind of like misdirected then? In that they're feeling an issue, maybe pointing it at the wrong thing. So they got a sense, having watched all 3 or 4 of these episodes, that Steven didn't have agency and didn't choose, and they maybe have aimed it at, well, he's mindless in the episode where the solution comes, but in reality, it's actually more of a complaint that can be aimed at the final episode for not showing us the moment he chose to go to therapy.
Yeah, I think.
You think that's what that is? So it's a valid issue, but it's being kind of misaimed at this episode or the monster idea.
To be honest with you, I don't think it's even been misaimed because we are the. This is the only, not the only discussion. I'm sure other people have done it this way or whatever, but this is. We have broken down our discussion into the 3 episodes. People commenting on Reddit, commenting on the Discord, even if the first sentence is about episode 2 specifically, they could very much be talking about the whole thing. I think for me the complaint or the challenge is more across all 3. We didn't see him choose or didn't have anything to suggest he chose. And I think I think it's there. I think he probably did choose in between episodes 2 and 3 off screen, but I understand the challenge of it would have been good to see that because I think it would have been as we'll discuss next time. I think the 3rd episode could have done the 4th episode could have done a whole lot more to show and talk about those things.
I mean, having read the comments, there are a lot of people specifically pointing at the monster, though, and saying he has no agency, so he's not choosing anything.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen the comments.
Specifically, so that's what I'm saying, though. Is like, just in reference to your last thing about, like, we don't know which episode they're referring to. A lot of people specifically were citing how uncomfortable they felt seeing Steven cured, the issue resolved, whatever, in quote marks, while he had no agency. Specifically pointing at the monster and the lack of Steven being able to make choices. But I would suggest that maybe the framing might be the issue in terms of that complaint, because to me that wasn't the cure. That's not what made him better. That was his friends getting him supporting him to help him make that first step of admitting he has a problem. Essentially, that's how I saw it anyway. But yeah, there are a lot of people talking about that. There are a lot of people disappointed that because a lot of the people that are part of this support system and this hug actually were the cause of his PTSD, that's kind of left unhandled and not really dealt with. Yeah, I get it. It's again, that's really to be dealt with. That you're never going to deal with all that in 40 minutes of television. Full stop.
No, but also, as I said earlier, it's not
Not really what it was about.
Could the next episode have done more to indicate that kind of stuff had happened? Yes, but equally, it's not. Whilst I'll take any Steven Universe content I can. Like I say, him sitting in a room with White Diamond talking about how she behaved and her listening isn't necessarily going to be. There would be more complaints about that episode than people saying yes. I think that, again, though, I really do think the next episode should have done more to indicate those conversations had happened. But what is also key is this episode demonstrates that, because he does love his family, he does love all of those people. Yes, that as they themselves admit. And that's important. We've not necessarily talked much about that moment, but they all break down and admit how they've contributed to this. So what's key is, whilst they then hug him, they're hugging him because they themselves have admitted their fault here, and that's what's key. What's key is
that's a really good
the
point.
demonstration that they are willing to admit their faults, and they are willing to. This whole episode for me ends on a note of everyone saying, "If you discuss with us, we'll discuss with you." So I think the things that suggest those conversations will take place are present here. What's missing is the affirmation that they did take place in the next episode.
Gotcha. You're right. Again, this episode sets it up perfectly. Maybe it's the next episode that drops the ball and some of the frustration is misdirected. The other one I saw, no fusions. That come up a lot, particularly regarding Lapidot. Look, guys, we talked about this last week. Scale, and this isn't Steven Universe. This is Steven Universe Future, and it was very much always a more subtle show about Steven and his personal struggles. You weren't going to get a big final crazy battle with loads of fusions and insanity. You just weren't. It was never good. I don't think that was ever on the cards, truthfully. And also, I think there's a very good argument to be made, as much as I would like to see it, for both those characters not getting fusions. So as a result of that, the only way those characters could have fused in this show is if there'd been episodes dedicated to exploring their choice. Lapis has made it very clear that she sees fusion as a prison, and that there's a lot of her trauma related to that. And Paradox, last time we spoke to Paradox, she was kind of there's been some talk of Paradox sort of being a representation of a more asexual person, and therefore she doesn't really. The idea it's a metaphor for asexuality, that she doesn't really want to fuse, and it's just not something she's interested in. And either way, neither of those things could be dealt with without actually spending an episode doing them. If they'd have just fused in this episode while fighting the Steven Kaiju, that would have been horrendous. That would have been, because there's so much that would need to be discussed and dealt with and looked at for that to work. And I think you'd have done the characters a massive disservice making them randomly fuse here, in my opinion.
You'd have also missed part of the joy, and part of the want to see them fuse would be to see Steven's reaction to them fuse.
Sure.
And you wouldn't have got that, so you'd have missed that. And it reminds me of I personally, slight 2-minute tangent. I personally hate that in Avengers Endgame, the character resolution for the Hulk has happened off screen, and that we start with Professor Hulk, who in a scene in a cafe explains essentially to the audience what's happened and where that resolution's come from. I don't like that we don't get that moment. I don't like that it happened off screen. I think it's a really weird, we literally,
especially when it could have happened at the end of the previous movie in the fight.
But
it's not even like they didn't even get the opportunity. That's
no, but
what's insane.
But this is the point that I'm saying. This for me is the comparison to what we're talking about here, because what the writers have said is that they didn't do that because the original idea was to have Professor Hulk / Hulk busting out of the Iron Man armor and being the Hulk in that moment. So that's what they were going to do. Now, I hate that we didn't get that, but I completely get their argument for not doing it. And their argument for not doing it is that in a film which is building to ultimate devastation, and in a series of scenes that is building to ultimate devastation, you can't have a moment of triumph. You can't have Hulk succeed, because it just completely interrupts the flow of everything else. And the same with this. In a scene, in a collection of scenes that is leading to the focus being on Stephen and dealing with Stephen, and how do we tackle this? Well, we tackle it with love and we tackle it with talking. To have a moment dedicated to a fusion doesn't service either moment, either idea well enough to justify putting it in there.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I think
so. I get that. I hate that we were robbed of it, or not robbed of it. I hate that we didn't get to see it in the way that I hate that we didn't get to see it with Hulk. But from a story point of view and the story that was being told at the time, of course you prioritise the devastation of Thanos and what's going on with Stephen. Like you just have to.
I 100% agree. Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that came up a lot was the lack of any of the stuff regarding Pink and Rose being addressed. A lot of people saying that's the root of a lot of his issues. Again, I feel like we weren't actually... These episodes were more about getting him on the path to dealing with his issues, not specifically about the issues themselves. Pink and Rose rarely came up in these episodes. We only had one episode that even looked at some of that. And admittedly... I remember somebody reminded me that at the end of that episode, where he was looking at whether we had the portrait of his mother and he put it away, that I even said, we better come back to sort of dealing with this because they've made a pretty big point of but I think what we were doing, the show has clearly done something different to what I thought it was doing. So that was like episode 3, 4. What was the episode where the Famethist came back and he met all those roses?
I think it was early, yeah. I think it was like around 3 or 4.
Yeah, so at that point I don't think it was clear this show was just piling on his trauma. Rosebuds, that was the name of the episode. God, that was doing my head and I couldn't quite remember what it was called. I think it was episode 3. So at that point, it wasn't clear the show was just slowly going to build all of the trauma in and show him denying it bit by bit, because that's essentially what they were doing. So the trauma with his dad is represented by him dismissing that by deleting the picture of Greg Greg DeMeo. The trauma from his mother, he's dismissing and ignoring and burying that by putting that picture of her away. Do you see,
Yeah, definitely.
They slowly build it up. So when I saw Rosebuds, I only had the first, 5% of the show. And with that being the only hint to what they were going to be tackling with, I went, well, we better deal with that. But when I think we got further in and it became clear they were just piling on trauma after trauma, it became very evident that's not really... The show wasn't actually going to be about dealing with those individual traumas. That's something that's a personal journey for Stephen that he's got to go on at some point, presumably with a therapist or whatever. It was going to become more about him denying those traumas one by one. And I think that's what they did. And I think taking a bunch of time to look specifically at any one of them would have made the others feel less significant, and I think they're all equally significant traumas in his past.
Do you think a lot of that could have been resolved? Because I know they came out and they said it was a limited series, but because also at that point we didn't know 20 episodes, 10 episodes, 2 seasons, 3 seasons. Do you think if they'd have come out and gone, Steven Universe Future is a 20-episode miniseries that will stand on its own and deal with the soldier after the war, deal with what happens to Steven after he saved the universe? And they kind of did that. I think similar phrases were used, but if they were a lot clearer on that, and by they, who knows whose decision all this shit, it's most likely Cartoon Network.
Yeah.
Do you think that would have helped with some of this stuff?
I think it would have been. I think because I think some of this stuff, a lot of this stuff, can be put back down to expectations. Look, I mean, some people are calling it anticlimactic, unsatisfying, rushed, abrupt, shallow. These are some of the key words I wrote down, and I this is what I'm saying. I went through a bunch of like comments, and it was really interesting to see how common some of these words were. Particularly those ones I just listed were all the top ones that were coming up: anticlimactic, unsatisfying, rushed, abrupt, and shallow were like right up there. And I think a lot of those come down to expectations. Yeah, it would have seemed anticlimactic if you were expecting a change of mind style battle. It would have felt unsatisfying if you were expecting him to deal with all of that trauma. It would have felt rushed to somebody who felt, and this one is one of the fairer arguments I found, because so I'm saying, you've got to understand that he became the monster because of the fraud complex, and a lot of people are like, well, hey, the fraud complex came one episode ahead of this resolution, so you're telling me this is a 20-episode show, and the problem for the final episode occurs in the episode before the final 2 episodes. Like, you know what I mean? And I think that's... I can sort of see what's coming up there. But I think it's all connected. I don't think it is as simple as everything's fine, introduces a fraud complex, I'm a monster resolves it. I think the fraud complex is a result of all the piling on of stuff leading up to that. I think that's just the reveal of the fraud complex. Does that make sense? So but I totally understand that perspective, but like some of the other ones about it feeling like shallow and stuff, again, I think it just comes down to expectations and expecting the show to individually handle all these sources of trauma as a solution, and I just don't feel like that was not ever likely. When the show was younger, when there were less things being established, that was a possibility. I even was on that route. So, but again, you're right, Chris. It's about expectation, and having known this was a 20-episode arc that was going to go the way it went, I think, I certainly would have had different expectations of this ending, and it might have definitely coloured my interpretation of it for sure. And that's not to say anyone is wrong to feel not happy with this ending. In fact, just to clarify, actually, because I've sat here, listing off a bunch of people's criticisms and sort of giving my sort of thoughts as to why I don't particularly personally agree with them. I just want to make that very clear. That is just me. I'm not telling any of those people they're wrong to feel that way. I think it's very important that we establish this now, because I probably should have said this before I started talking about the criticisms. But I just found it very interesting. There were so many criticisms of it, and discussion worthy, and because I didn't feel that way at all, and I found that really fascinating that people felt that a handful of people really did feel very strongly about it. It doesn't seem to be the majority, if I'm being fair. In fact, a few of them even commented that this one I actually saw a lot as well. I didn't write it down, but I saw a lot of people frustrated with the lack of people that agreed with them. So there was a person on our Discord that had mentioned going into another Steven Universe Discord and being quite aggressively disagreed with when they said they weren't happy with the ending. And there were people in the Reddit thread saying, like, I'm reading all the comments, because of course they didn't do what I did and sort it by downvoted. That's the error. But they were just seeing the top comments, which of course within a fandom are always going to be the positive ones, and they were saying, like, I don't understand, I'm reading all these positive comments and I just didn't feel that way about it. And look, I hear you, I do, I don't agree, I didn't feel that way, but like, no ending is going to satisfy everyone. That's just the way it goes, right?
No.
So yeah, the people who think it felt forced or anticlimactic or abrupt or any of that stuff, you might not be able to necessarily articulate exactly why that happened or why you felt that way. Some of them couldn't, some of them could, some of them couldn't. But you're certainly not alone. there are definitely a handful. I was surprised at the number of comments I was able to dig out once I sorted them by downvoted. I still couldn't believe it was that easy. Like, I was like, I'm going to sift through hundreds of comments. Some of them are going to be good, some of them are going to be bad.
Especially when and like, this isn't like I know people that go, oh yeah, Dexter finale sucked, or How I Met Your Mother didn't like what they did there, and that's the extent of it. If you're writing on a Reddit thread, if you're on a Discord about the show, then please, if you don't like something, you're upset and annoyed that you don't like it. So anyone attacking any of those people or saying they're wrong or anything like that, that's not their chosen way of doing it. If they're a troll, yeah, fuck it. But chances are that this person is going, oh, it wasn't what I wanted, and felt that crushing sense of, oh shit, the way I did a little bit with I loved everything, and then the final episode, as I've said a lot, kind of made me go, oh, I'm not so sure about this one, and I didn't like that. I didn't like that I was feeling that way. So please don't attack people for just being like, right, these are my feelings about it. Don't be like, oh, you're wrong and blah 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 blah. Hear them out. Make it a discussion, because chances are that person themselves doesn't like that they feel that way. That person probably wants to feel the way that you feel about it. Yeah.
Yeah,
I just think it's a real,
and I guess we've just gone through a list of things that they think and disagreed with them. So I guess we could easily be argued as just spending
but I think we've discussed them.
Telling everybody who feels that way that they're wrong. But I want to make it clarified. No matter whatever language was used in terms of like how we phrased any of our disagreements with that, we just feel differently, and for the reasons we're explaining. I think that's just us expressing our other side of that same argument.
Yeah, I think it was a discussion. I think I just think it wasn't downvoting. It wasn't.
Yeah. I was really worried what this might come across as, because what I wanted to do, because I didn't feel that way, and I knew you didn't feel that way about this specific episode. I was really worried we weren't going to be giving a voice to those people, and I was like, shit, we should probably look at some of this stuff. And I was so worried going into this that it was going to look like me just being like, look at these idiots. I'm going to list all the things they think and tell them how silly they are, which I promise, if to anyone who feels like it came across that way, not my intention at all. My heart was in the right place. I wanted to give that voice, not just pick apart everything people said. But of course, if I'm going to read out that opinion, I want to give the counter opinion. So, that might seem like, me trying to shoot ducks in a barrel, but or fish in a barrel, whatever that stupid saying is. But I promise that's not what I was doing. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it comes across like you were. My big sort of
no, I'm covering anybody. I'm covering anybody feeling that way. I'm sort of I'm preempting the comments.
So what other stuff did you notice / trip, Dan?
Sour Cream hanging out with his dad is the first shot of the episode. I loved that so much. Well, I say with his dad. We're hanging out with not his biological dad. Hanging out with Yellowtail, listening to music together. They were sharing an iPod. They were having a little listen to one of his jams, I guess. So he's finally accepted the support of his stepdad. I think that's really sweet.
Yeah, I do too. A nice subtle resolution.
Yeah, very subtle, but very good. Vidalia still painting amethyst for some reason. Cool. I don't know why she is, but I like it. I thought it was nice to see Dewey and Buck hanging out. Dewey's still wearing his big donut shirt, suggesting he still works there. They were hanging out with a lace amethyst, or were they? Were they just walking down the same street? I don't know, but there you go. I thought it was nice that we got a glimpse of Bismuth and Perry fixing up the part of Little Homeworld Stephen destroyed last week. Just as a little nod that that's being done.
That was nice.
Yeah. On the tower, we got a little Larimar Lapis and an Angel Aura, and the Angel Aura Quartz, just having a looking on at the things. So just wanted to list some of the characters we got to glimpse at that early part before the core gang got together. I noted down that I thought it was interesting that they didn't show the transformation, and I wanted to talk to you about this. Do you think this whole episode could have been more effective had we seen the transformation? Because I've gone back and forth on this.
Only if we'd have seen the transformation I'd have preferred to have seen the transformation at the end of Everything's Fine, I think, than the beginning of this. Because and I think it is quite effective that you know what's happening, but you do because you've seen the intro and read the theories. But hopefully the majority of people don't necessarily know what's about to happen. And for some people, that reveal of, where's Stephen, that is Stephen, could be them realising, well, no, because it shoots out, doesn't it? Would it have been cool to see the transformation? Yes, I think the beginning of this episode builds quite nicely. So if we were going to see the transformation, I'd have preferred to have seen it at the end of the last episode.
Yeah, I think maybe that's why I'm a little bit torn on this, because there's a part of me that goes, "Oh, what you don't see, it's the old horror trick it's worse to imagine than it is to see. You fill in the blanks, and I love it. And there's part of me that goes, that's great that they didn't show it. And there's part of me that goes, did they not show it because it's cheaper to not show the transformation? And then there's another part of me that goes, God, wouldn't that have been a real kick in the teeth at the end of Everything's Fine to really see a brutal Steven transforming in front of everyone's horrified eyes? Would that not have put more weight into this final episode? So I am absolutely of two minds on the transformation and whether we should have seen it or not, because part of me doesn't want to see the body horror and thinks maybe the mind's eye is worse than what they could have physically showed on screen. But then there's a part of me that goes, oh, how much more powerful could that last episode have been, though, if we'd have seen a really horrendous transformation at the end? So I something that really put a stamp on.
It's a logistics thing as well, though. Like, he's so big, presumably, he must have burst through the entire house, and how did they then end up on the beach and him in the water and all of that sort of stuff?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's fair. I don't know. Yeah, I was torn on that. And I remain torn on that. I don't know if anyone wants to comment below and sort of give perspective on that and let me sort of maybe help me sort my own feelings out on whether we saw it or not. Because I think someone even said in the Discord, isn't it great they didn't show it? And I remember at the time just being like, yeah, it's great, the mind's eye. And now I'm just like, I don't know anymore. I don't know what I think. But I definitely noted it down because I thought that was interesting.
I think the mind's eye and the suspense for the viewers that didn't know is better, I think.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's a good point. We're assuming everyone knew, but we're assuming everyone knew, and I guess in the future people might not be as.
Here we are in the future.
I did like that they didn't waste any time bringing in the crystal temps. They were.
Is that a fan thing, or is that has someone official referred to them as crystal temps?
Didn't they call them the crystal temps in that episode? Were they?
No, they were called the new crystal gems in that episode.
Huh.
Well, they might have called them that in another episode. I just personally don't like it. I like to think of them as crystal gems. So I thought that when you said it earlier, so I just wondered where the phrase had come from.
I think it's just a way to differentiate, though, because if I'd have said the sentence then and used crystal gems, you'd have been like, well, yeah, they were already there. And I mean, oh no, the other ones, the ones that don't live at the beach house.
No, I'd have said. Biz, I'm not moaning at you. I'm just curious where it came from. I just think it's a phrase.
I was responding
peridot, and lapis.
I was responding to your criticism of the phrase, and I'm yes, you're right. It's a little dismissive. They are crystal gems, 100%. They're part of the gang. But sometimes when having a conversation about them, it's nice to have a quick name to use that refers to that team. So that you can differentiate between the two. So that's the only reason I used it.
But I just wondered where it came from, whether that was
it must be a fan thing.
thing.
I felt like it came from that new Crystal Gems episode, but I could be wrong. Comment below.
I'm sure in that they called themselves the new Crystal Gems, but
I remember there being like a bunch of workshop names in that episode, but I could be wrong. I could very well be wrong.
Oh, maybe you could be right. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. Comment below, everyone. Where did that come from? I love the line from Garnet. As long as he believes he's a monster, he'll stay one. That leans into my preferred theory of it being a shape-shifting thing.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's my preferred as well.
Mm-hmm. Rather than a corruption thing. The amethyst line that got them. I loved it so much. We need to reach him in there. Bring out his humanity. You know who'd be really great at that? Steven. So good.
Yeah, that made me laugh.
So good. Spinell got a good laugh out of me this week. Steven, you forgot your foot thong thingy. That's amazing.
I did like, because they concentrated on that so much, and like when that happened, I was like, seriously? Like, did they concentrate on that so they could be like, this is the reason they've come back? Like, he's run away upset. Can't the reason just be we wanted to check on you?
Yeah,
unless they're using the sandal as an excuse.
I would have preferred that. I would have preferred, Steven, you left in such a hurry. You okay? Like, that would have been a much nicer way for them to land. I agree with you there. I mean, it's a good joke, but is the joke worth the loss of? I like the idea they care better. That's more important than the joke.
And their episode is like, is all about Homeward Bound, is all about they're more caring. Yellow wants to fix the cluster. Blue isn't about making people upset. She's about making people happy. White's new power is helping her identify and understand other people. Like, they've done enough to set the Diamonds up as, oh, you seemed upset. Is everything okay?
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
So I just thought the.
Well, yeah. On point with you there. I think you're exactly right. So my question here, I wrote down: is Steven the most powerful diamond? No one could stop him.
Yeah, he's the most powerful diamond.
That's crazy, right? Do you think that's the humanity that makes him that powerful? Like being half gem, half human gives him some sort of extra layer of power or something? Or do you think just Pink Diamond was always the most powerful diamond? She just didn't know it.
I think there's been a lot of evidence that Pink herself was also particularly powerful, but I think Steven and the humanity of it all definitely plays a big part in it.
Right. There you go. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I love that we got the cluster. We haven't really talked about it, but the cluster even contributes to the hug at the end, because of course the cluster also another being that has been helped by Steven. Steven went down to sort of stop the cluster in quote marks and ended up rationalizing with it, befriending it and helping it through its trauma, and stopped it from destroying the Earth. Incredible that the cluster was there for Steven the same way his friends were.
Cluster looks strong. Cluster looks muscular.
I know. Loving it. Someone said they were a little disappointed Cluster didn't take a different form this time, but I can't wait. I think if Cluster had taken a slightly different form, we'd have had to have a line of, what's that? Oh, it's the Cluster. It's taken a new form. And I just think, like, for simplicity's sake, like, it's fine.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Recognizably, the hand, it's fine. It's been a hand before. I get it. Yeah. Like, I don't know. I just, for simplicity's sake, I just think as nice as it might have been to see it take a different form, I don't really know what that would have added, and it would have probably detracted because we've had to spend like 10, 20 seconds like having that exchange for someone to explain it was the Cluster. So yeah. I thought the Greg moment was really powerful. Not the moment when he was hugging Steven, as we talked about. I was a little bit like lukewarm on that. Although you're right, they dealt with a lot of that stuff in his episode with Steven. But the moment of, I always turn away when it's gem stuff, but not this time. I'm here for Steven. Like,
yeah, it was great. It was
powerful.
great, and it was more. My bigger argument was more, I think it's classic Greg, and as nuanced as that character's been, than the Mr. Universe argument.
Yeah, right, sure. Yeah. Apologies for misrepresenting your position.
As you should be.
And as I damn well am, Chris. Appropriately ashamed of myself. Don't worry about it.
Good. I want you to, after the podcast's done, I want you to go to Nadia and she'd be like, was it good recording?
Tell her what I done.
It was a bit where I misrepresented what Chris was saying. She'd be like, God damn it, Dan.
Stand in your corner. Just me with a dunce hat on, just like I did it again.
Stand in that corner of the room, or as we like to call it these days, the holiday home.
Yeah, stand in that corner of the room. You know what being in isolation feels like? Do you ever watch I think it's like the second or third episode of Futurama where Fry goes to Bender's apartment, and it's basically a closet because he just stands in it and turns off. And Fry goes in there and squeezes in with him, and it shuts, and they're just like trapped in this like cupboard type space. And Bender's like, "Let me give you the tour. Over there's the breakfast nook," and he just points to one corner of it, and over there is the living area, and over there, and then Fry's like, "Where am I sleeping? And where do I hang my clothes?" And he goes, "You only got one set of clothes, and you ain't taking them off while I'm in here." So like that's what being in isolation feels like. You're in such a small space and you're trying to live your entire life within it. It's really weird. That's how I
think it's so like I haven't, like, a lot of people seem to be struggling with boredom and kind of struggling with that kind of thing of it being, and that is less the case for me. For me, the bigger thing is like, or my own personal, the moments where I get like fuck is when I kind of think about how the world's changed. Just watching, it really struck me watching Ant and Dec last night, because they basically did a clip show, and I'm watching clips of studio audience all together laughing, not knowing when that's going to be able to happen again. it hits me way more personally, and I get
Yes.
different strokes, different people. Like, I'm not criticizing anyone that gets affected by other things, not
Well,
at all.
to be fair, Chris, we've been training for isolation all of our lives. I mean, this is basically our Olympics.
I think it is funny. I think it does identify there are people that can handle being in the same room, being at home for a long period of time, and there are people where that affects them, and absolutely fair. Different, like I say, different people react to different things.
For sure. Anyway, so getting back to Steven Universe, because otherwise we are going to go off on another coronavirus tangent, and we probably shouldn't. The Greg thing for me was powerful because it just felt like weirdly the completing of an arc. Like the very second episode of this show established Greg's that's gem stuff, I'm out, I don't really get gem stuff attitude, and they've never waned on that. That's always kind of been Greg's thing. He's always been there for Steven emotionally and personally, but gem stuff he's always had to defer to the crystal gems. And the idea that he was like, not this time. It's too serious. My son's in real, like, and you could argue, and I think maybe a little cynically, but you definitely could argue, well, wait a minute, Steven's been in a lot of really life-threatening situations. Like, where was this attitude in Greg then? I guess you could say that for sure, but this was more about, I think the difference is, it's not bravery to stand up to something that you can't help with. Like, Greg couldn't ever have helped fighting the diamonds. Ever. But this was very well established as actually not being about a fight, but being about getting through to Steven. Greg's got this, cracks his knuckles, like, this is his wavelength. So so for those arguing, why didn't Greg sort of make more of a stand when Steven was more in danger in previous seasons and episodes? I think there's a reason this one was more his speed, but it was still technically gem stuff, and so it was interesting and a really nice moment to see him finally get over his gem phobia, certainly in terms of raising Steven, and being like, I've got to be there for my son right now. I thought that was a really cool moment. I really liked Connie telling the diamonds basically to shut up and stop making it about themselves.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Like, just fucking awesome. Like, god damn it, she's the best. She's great in this episode. Connie is. What I love about this show is it would be so hard in any other show with worse writers to make the love interest as awesome and thoughtful and clever and powerful and, like, as much of an amazing person as the hero, because the hero always comes across like an amazing person. They're the hero, right? We're always seeing them overcoming the obstacles. That's storytelling. That's how it works. This show, despite not being about Connie, has made her seem as capable and brave and just brilliant as a person and understanding and selfless as Steven, and that's incredible. How have they managed that? I don't know, but they have, and it's wonderful. And Connie's the best. So yeah, I think I've gone through all my notes. I think that's all the moments that I wanted to talk about. So is there any triv? Should we see if there's any triv, Chris? I've been waiting to refresh it while we record because I didn't want to like miss out on one that's added as we're recording, because obviously we're still we're recording like a day and a half, 2 days after this ad. So let's have a gander. What have we got? Episode's title is likely a reference to the episode title for I Am My Mom. That is fair. This is the third episode with the word monster in the title, after Monster Buddies and Monster Reunion, although those two episodes focused on Steven's relationship with Nephrite, rather than this being more about the bigger story in himself. This is the only episode technically to take place outside Steven's point of view, without someone telling him the events to happen.
Oh yeah,
that's true. Yeah, I don't really have anything to say on that, but yeah, technically Steven's point of view. I mean, he's definitely. Well, then again, he must be taking in everything that's happening around him because he obviously reacts to them talking to him. But yeah, interesting. When everyone is hugging and embracing Steven, Bismuth's distorted kick drum plays as she leaps onto him, as well as Spinell's distorted vinyl sound playing when she leaps in. So the music cues the characters. Steven's monster
which is
form.
great.
Steven's monster form is likely a reference to Godzilla. Steven's monster form may also be a reference to the Great Ape Ozaru forms of Goku, Gohan, and Vegeta from the Dragon Ball franchise. So there you go.
I thought that
They
immediately.
did you? Yeah. The creature even has a similar roar to the Ozaru. That is definitely true now I think about it, but did not notice it during the episode. On the point of the Dragon Ball thing, by the way, how proud I was. You know how I gave a big, ridiculous 5 to 10 minute speech about how it reminded me really strongly, not just of Dragon Ball Z, but of the Piccolo Gohan training sequence of episodes. That sort of storyline, that story arc from Dragon Ball Z. One of the people who boarded that episode said that they actually reboarded the fight to make it feel more like that very specific arc of Dragon Ball Z.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I was pleased that I spotted it, slightly worried that I clearly watched too much Dragon Ball Z that I noticed it, but also really impressed with them that they managed to convey the feeling of another TV show's arc in a 10-minute episode of their TV show. That's incredible.
That's great. Great work.
Yeah, 10 points. Other than that, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, Chris, very quickly, because we're probably not going to get a chance to talk about it in the last episode. On the subject of Pearl and Bismuth, very quickly, somebody pointed out to me, I say somebody pointed out to me, let me rephrase that. When I went looking through the Reddit comments in search of criticism, I found somebody who made a very interesting point. Do we not think Bismuth crafting wedding armor and using a pearl to design it and shape it and size it is in some way significant?
Oh, maybe. Yeah. Well, so is their theory that they are together?
I think they left it open ended. There's a few ways you could interpret that. Bismuth just sizing up wedding armor and has gone, well, I guess if we're going to make wedding armor, might as well make it pearl shaped for you never know. Or it is that they are confirmed, not confirmed, but like they are together, and that was them sort of prepping for a wedding, maybe.
It's my Hulk argument. There was no place for it. No, I still think you could have done it. As discussed last time, I still think you could have done it a bit with the final episode.
Agreed.
That's a lovely idea. I wish we'd seen more Pearl Bismuth if they were going down that route.
Yeah. There you go. Cool.
I want a Pearl. I'll take an unofficial Pearl Bismuth spin-off.
Yeah, I'll take anything at this point. You just give me more of this world. I'm so sad it's going. There you go, though. So that is everything. We've covered it, Chris. It's an episode short on plot, but plenty to discuss in terms of
definitely
the character stuff. And looking at some of the reaction to the episode. Again, it's worth noting. Obviously, we'd focused a little bit on some of the more negative comments, but there are a lot of people who, felt as we did watching this episode, really loved it, thought it worked really well, particularly as a companion piece to the previous one. But yeah, that's everything for this episode. Come back to us next time. Obviously, there's going to be some more, but in the meantime, feel free to leave comments below. And again, thank you to everyone who's been doing that in the previous couple episodes. We appreciate you taking the time to do that. You can get us on Patreon, patreon.com/nothingbutstaticuk, where you can, you can get access to early episodes and things like that. I say early episodes of Rewind Reviews, which will be going up, I think, next week. We're going to start putting them up on the Discord, and then it'll be a couple of weeks till we put them up on the main channel. But yeah, we're pretty excited to be getting some of that content out. So a couple of those are going to be going up in the next week or so. So feel free to join now, as little as $1 a month. You can get us on Twitter. I'm at Dan Doolan. Chris is at C Billingham, 2 M's. So you can send us direct messages. The email address is mail@nothingbutstatic.co.uk. If you want to email us some more sort of long form thoughts. We don't always get back to emails, but I do always read them. So feel free to send them along. What else? YouTube.com/nothingbutstaticuk. Give us a like, give us a subscribe on iTunes and Google Play. Do all the commenty likey things you can do on there as well, reviews and all that jazz. I think that's covered it. I think we've covered it.
Yeah, man. Great coverage.
The best. We're so good at coverage. All the coverage.
Top coverage. You want coverage? You come to Stephen University.
Damn right. So that is everything for this week. I've been Dan Doolan.
I've been Chris Billingham.
And come back in a couple of days' time as we discuss the future. really expected you to burst in with, "Here we are in the future."
Here we are in the future.
God, that was so loud.
Bye.